You think you know the story of World War II deception operations, code-breaking at Bletchley Park, double agents feeding false information, elaborate camouflage schemes to hide military preparations. But what if I told you that one of the most successful intelligence operations of the entire war involved a homeless man's corpse, a fictional love affair, and a briefcase full of fake documents that convinced Hitler to redeploy entire army divisions based on the romantic fantasies of a dead man who never existed? This is the story they don't want you to know. The story of Operation Mincemeat, where British intelligence officers Ewan Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley created the most elaborate fictional character in military history. How they transformed a suicide victim into Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, complete with a fiancée, unpaid bills, and a secret mission that would fool the German High Command. How a corpse became more convincing than any living spy, and how the greatest deception of the war was built on the smallest human details. But this isn't just another tale of wartime espionage or clever military strategy. This is the untold story of how two intelligence officers discovered that the most effective lies are those built on universal human truths, how they used Hitler's own paranoia against him, and how the fate of thousands of Allied soldiers came to depend on whether German intelligence would believe that a dead man had been careless with his briefcase. Welcome to the secret world of strategic deception, where the difference between success and failure in the invasion of Sicily came down to the credibility of a love letter written to a woman who never existed, and where the most important battle of 1943 was fought not with guns and tanks, but with imagination and attention to detail. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about intelligence warfare, the psychology of deception, and the price of creating a lie so perfect that even its creators sometimes forgot it wasn't true. January 15th, 1943. Room 13, the Admiralty, London. Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montagu stares at the corpse lying on the examination table, trying to see not a tragic suicide victim, but the foundation for the most audacious deception operation in military history. The body belongs to Glyndwr Michael, a 34-year-old homeless man who died after ingesting rat poison in a London warehouse. In life, Michael was invisible, one of thousands of displaced persons whose existence barely registered in official records. In death, he's about to become Major William Martin, Royal Marines, the most important fictional character of World War II. He'll do perfectly, observes Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley, Montagu's partner in what they've codenamed Operation Mincemeat. The right age, the right build, and most importantly, no family or friends who might ask awkward questions about his sudden reappearance in German intelligence reports. At 41, Montagu is a peacetime barrister who has been recruited into naval intelligence because of his understanding of legal evidence and his ability to construct convincing narratives. Cholmondeley, 27, is an RAF intelligence officer with a background in theatrical production who understands the importance of props, costumes, and character development in creating believable deceptions. The challenge isn't just creating a false identity, Montagu explains to their superior, Colonel John Bevan, who heads the London Controlling Section, responsible for strategic deception. It's creating a complete human being who will be convincing enough to fool the most sophisticated intelligence service in the world. The German intelligence service that they're attempting to deceive is indeed sophisticated, with decades of experience in analyzing captured documents and detecting Allied deception operations. The Abwehr has successfully exposed numerous British attempts at strategic deception, making them extremely skeptical of any intelligence that seems too convenient or too important. The Germans expect us to try to deceive them about our invasion plans, explains Major Frank Foley, the MI6 liaison officer, who has been briefing them on German intelligence capabilities. They're looking for false documents, planted information, and elaborate deception schemes. Our challenge is to create something that doesn't look like a deception operation. The strategic context for Operation Mincemeat is the planned Allied invasion of Sicily, scheduled for July 1943. The operation, codenamed Husky, represents the first major Allied assault on German-occupied Europe, but its success depends on achieving tactical surprise against German forces that are expecting an invasion somewhere in the Mediterranean. "The Germans know we're going to invade somewhere," explains General Bernard Montgomery during a briefing on invasion planning. "Sicily is the obvious target. It's close to our bases in North Africa, it controls the Mediterranean shipping lanes, and it provides a stepping stone to the Italian mainland. If Jerry concentrates his forces there, we'll face a bloodbath." The military necessity for deception is clear, but the method proposed by Montagu and Cholmondeley is unprecedented in its complexity and ambition. Instead of simply planting false documents or spreading rumors, they're creating an entire fictional person whose accidental death will reveal Allied invasion plans that point away from Sicily. "The beauty of the plan," Cholmondeley explains to the planning committee, "is that it doesn't look like a deception operation. It looks like a tragic accident that has revealed genuine Allied secrets. The Germans won't be analyzing planted intelligence. They'll be analyzing intelligence that they've discovered themselves." The psychological principle underlying Operation Mincemeat is the understanding that people are more likely to believe information they think they've discovered independently than information that's obviously being provided to them. By making the Germans feel like they've uncovered Allied secrets through their own intelligence work, the operation exploits natural human cognitive biases. "Intelligence officers are trained to be suspicious of information that's handed to them," observes Dr. J.C. Masterman, the Oxford academic who chairs the 20 committee responsible for double-agent operations. "But they're much more trusting of information they think they've stolen or discovered through their own efforts." The creation of Major William Martin begins with the most mundane details of human existence, the kind of personal effects that every person carries, and that intelligence officers examine for clues about identity, background, and mission. "We need to build his entire life," Montagu tells his team of assistants as they begin assembling Martin's personal effects. Wallet contents, clothing labels, personal letters, photographs, everything that would be found on a real officer who died in an aircraft accident. The attention to detail required for creating a convincing fictional person proves enormous, as every item must be consistent with Martin's supposed background and mission, while providing subtle clues that will lead German intelligence to the conclusions the British want them to reach. "His wallet needs to contain the right amount of money for someone of his rank and social background," explains Jean Leslie, FAS secretary in the Naval Intelligence Division, who has been assigned to help develop Martin's character. "Too much money suggests he's been given special funds for a secret mission. Too little suggests he's not really an officer." The financial details of Martin's life require careful research into the actual expenses and income of Royal Marines officers, creating a fictional budget that reflects realistic spending patterns and financial obligations. "We've given him an overdraft at Lloyd's Bank, unpaid bills from his tailor, and a receipt for an engagement ring," reports Cholmondeley as he reviews Martin's financial profile. "He's living slightly beyond his means, which is typical for a young officer from a good family who's trying to maintain appearances." But the most important aspect of Martin's character development is the creation of his romantic relationship with Pam, a fictional fiancée whose letters will provide the emotional authenticity that makes the deception believable. "Love letters are the most personal documents that people carry," explains Hester Leggett, another Naval Intelligence Secretary who has been recruited to write Pam's correspondence. "They reveal personality, background, and emotional state in ways that official documents never can. If we can make the Germans believe in Martin's relationship with Pam, they'll believe in Martin himself." The love letters that Leggett creates for Pam represent some of the most sophisticated character development in the history of espionage, creating a complete personality for a woman who never existed, but whose emotional reality will convince German intelligence that her fiancé was a real person. "Darling Bilte," reads one of Pam's letters, "I do think, dearest, that you were a little unkind last night. You know that black dog I get sometimes, and I feel that you are miles away from me and don't really care two hoots about me or what I do." The emotional authenticity of Pam's letters reflects Leggett's understanding of how real people write to each other in intimate relationships, capturing the mixture of affection, insecurity, and everyday concerns that characterize genuine correspondence. The key is making her feel real, Leggett explains to Montague as they review her latest batch of letters. She can't be too perfect or too dramatic. She needs to be an ordinary young woman with ordinary concerns who happens to be in love with an extraordinary man. The development of Martin's professional identity requires equally careful attention to detail, as his military background must be convincing enough to justify his access to high-level strategic information while explaining why he would be carrying such sensitive documents. We've made him a staff officer specializing in amphibious operations, explains Lieutenant Patricia Davies, a WRNS officer who has been researching Royal Marines organization and procedures. He's attached to Combined Operations Headquarters, which gives him legitimate access to invasion planning documents. The military credentials that Davies creates for Martin include service records, training certificates, and performance evaluations that establish his competence and reliability while explaining his current assignment to carry sensitive documents between London and Allied headquarters in North Africa. His service record shows steady promotion and excellent performance evaluations, Davies reports. He's exactly the kind of officer who would be trusted with important documents, but not so senior that his death would be immediately reported in the newspapers. The balance between importance and anonymity proves crucial to the operation's credibility, as Martin must be significant enough to have access to strategic secrets, but not so prominent that his fictional existence can be easily verified or disproven. We need him to be invisible in life, but important in death, Cholmondeley observes as they finalize Martin's background. A competent staff officer who does important work but doesn't attract attention to himself. The final element of Martin's character development is the creation of the strategic documents that he will supposedly be carrying when his aircraft crashes into the sea off the Spanish coast. These documents must be important enough to justify the risk of sending them by courier, but not so obviously false that German intelligence will immediately recognize them as deception material. The documents need to tell a story, explains Colonel Bevan as he reviews the proposed deception material. They can't just contain false information. They need to reveal that false information in a way that seems natural and unintentional. The strategic deception that the documents will convey focuses on Allied plans to invade Greece and Sardinia rather than Sicily, with Sicily mentioned only as a cover operation designed to distract German attention from the real targets. We're not just lying about our invasion plans, Montague explains to the planning committee. We're creating a complex narrative that explains why we would want the Germans to think we're invading Sicily when we're actually planning to invade somewhere else. The psychological sophistication of the deception reflects Montague's understanding that the most effective lies are those that acknowledge the possibility of deception while appearing to reveal the truth behind the deception. The Germans know we're capable of deception operations, he tells his team. So we're going to deceive them about our deception operations. We'll make them think that our real plan is to deceive them into believing we're going to invade Sicily, when actually we want them to think we're going somewhere else. The complexity of the deception strategy requires careful coordination with other Allied intelligence operations to ensure that the false information provided by Martin's documents is consistent with other sources of intelligence that the Germans might receive. We're creating a symphony of deception, explains Masterman during a coordination meeting. Martin's documents are just one instrument in an orchestra of false information that includes double agents, radio intercepts, and diplomatic communications. Everything has to harmonize to create a convincing overall picture. The preparation phase of Operation Mincemeat takes 4 months, as Montague and Cholmondeley work to create not just a fictional character, but an entire fictional world that will be convincing enough to fool the most sophisticated intelligence analysts in the German military. We're not just creating a dead man, Montague observes, as they put the finishing touches on Martin's identity. We're creating a life so convincing that even we sometimes forget it's not real. The test of their creation will come when Martin's body washes ashore in Spain, carrying documents that could change the course of the war if the Germans believe they're genuine, or expose one of the most elaborate deception operations in history if they don't. April 30th, 1943, 0430 hours, HMS Seraph, 30 miles off the Spanish coast near Huelva. Lieutenant Commander Norman Jewell watches as his crew carefully lowers the body of Major William Martin into the Mediterranean, beginning the final act of the most elaborate theatrical performance in military history. The submarine's crew has been told only that they're conducting a special intelligence operation involving the disposal of a courier who died in an aircraft accident. They don't know that the man they're committing to the sea never existed, or that his fictional death is designed to save thousands of real lives. The tide and currents should carry him to shore within 12 hours, reports Lieutenant David Chen, the navigation officer who has calculated the precise release point based on oceanographic data and weather forecasts. The Spanish authorities will find him before decomposition makes the deception obvious. The timing of Martin's discovery is crucial to the operation's success, as his body must be fresh enough to suggest a recent aircraft accident, but not so fresh that Spanish authorities become suspicious about how he reached their coast. We've given him a Mae West life jacket that's been properly inflated and weathered, explains Petty Officer Robert Martinez, who has been responsible for preparing the body for its final journey. He looks like someone who survived an aircraft crash and died of exposure while floating in the sea. The physical preparation of Martin's body reflects months of research into the effects of seawater exposure and aircraft accidents, ensuring that every detail supports the cover story of a courier who died while attempting to deliver important documents to Allied headquarters in North Africa. The briefcase is attached to his wrist with a chain, just as regulations require for classified documents, reports Lieutenant Sarah Walsh, who has been coordinating the final preparations. Even if the Spanish authorities are suspicious, they'll have to cut the chain to examine the contents, which will look like they're violating the integrity of British military documents. The psychological pressure on the Spanish authorities to examine Martin's documents while maintaining plausible deniability about their actions is a crucial element of the operation's design. Spain's neutral status requires them to return British military documents to British authorities, but their cooperation with German intelligence makes it likely that the documents will be copied before being returned. The Spanish will photograph the documents and share them with German intelligence, predicts Major Michael O'Brien, the Foreign Office liaison who has been studying Spanish behavior patterns, but they'll also return the originals to us, which will allow us to determine whether the Germans have taken the bait. The intelligence feedback mechanism built into Operation Mincemeat allows the British to monitor German reactions to the deception material and adjust their invasion plans accordingly. If the Germans believe Martin's documents, they'll redeploy forces away from Sicily. If they don't, the British will know that their deception has failed. We'll be able to tell from German troop movements whether they've believed our story, explains Colonel Bevan during a final briefing before Martin's deployment. If divisions start moving from Sicily to Greece and Sardinia, we'll know the operation has succeeded. The strategic intelligence that Operation Mincemeat is designed to provide goes beyond simple deception to create a comprehensive picture of German decision-making processes and intelligence capabilities. We're not just trying to fool them about our invasion plans, Montague explains to the planning committee. We're testing their entire intelligence system to see how they process and evaluate strategic information. The body of Major Martin washes ashore near Huelva at 0930 hours on May 1st, 1943, where it's discovered by a Spanish fisherman who immediately reports the find to local authorities. The Spanish response unfolds exactly as British intelligence has predicted, with the documents being photographed and shared with German intelligence before being returned to British authorities. The Spanish have behaved precisely as we expected, reports the British consul in Huelva during his initial assessment of the situation. They've examined the documents thoroughly, photographed everything, and are now preparing to return the briefcase to us with expressions of regret about the tragic accident. The Spanish cooperation with both British and German intelligence reflects their delicate position as a neutral country that must maintain relationships with both sides while protecting their own interests. Madrid is playing a complex game, observes the Foreign Office analyst responsible for Spanish affairs. They're giving us back our documents to maintain diplomatic relations, but they're also sharing the contents with Berlin to maintain their intelligence relationship with Germany. The German response to Martin's documents exceeds even the most optimistic British expectations, as senior intelligence officers immediately recognize the strategic importance of the information and begin analyzing its implications for German defensive planning. Intercepted German communications indicate intense interest in the documents, reports the Government Code and Cipher School, which has been monitoring German intelligence traffic. They're treating this as a major intelligence coup and are requesting additional resources to analyze the implications. The German intelligence analysis of Martin's documents reveals both the sophistication of their analytical capabilities and the effectiveness of the British deception operation in exploiting German assumptions about Allied strategic planning. The Germans are convinced that the documents are genuine, reports Major Tommy Kowalski, the intelligence analyst who has been tracking German reactions. They're particularly impressed by the personal details in Martin's correspondence, which they see as evidence that he was a real person carrying real secrets. The psychological impact of Martin's personal effects on German intelligence officers demonstrates the effectiveness of Montagu and Cholmondeley's character development work. The love letters from Pam, the unpaid bills, and the other mundane details of Martin's fictional life convince German analysts that they're dealing with genuine intelligence rather than planted deception material. The Germans are spending more time analyzing Martin's personal life than his professional documents, observes Dr. Masterman during a review of intercepts. They're using his relationship with Pam and his financial problems to validate his identity, which then makes them more likely to believe the strategic information he was carrying. The validation process that German intelligence applies to Martin's documents reflects their understanding that the most effective way to detect deception operations is to examine the personal details that are most difficult to fabricate convincingly. German intelligence doctrine emphasizes the importance of personal authentication. It explains the MI6 analyst who has been studying German counterintelligence methods. They know that anyone can create false strategic documents, but they believe that creating a convincing personal life for a fictional character is much more difficult. The irony that German intelligence is being deceived by exactly the kind of personal details they rely on to detect deception demonstrates the thoroughness of the British character development work and the effectiveness of using human psychology to overcome analytical skepticism. We've beaten them at their own game, Cholmondeley observes with satisfaction. They're using their most sophisticated analytical techniques to prove that our fictional character is real. The strategic impact of German belief in Martin's documents becomes apparent within weeks as intelligence reports begin to show German forces redeploying away from Sicily toward Greece and Sardinia. The German 1st Panzer Division has been moved from Sicily to Greece, reports the intelligence summary for May 15th. Additional coastal defense units are being transferred to Sardinia, and Rommel has been appointed to command Army Group B with responsibility for defending the Balkans. The troop movements that follow German acceptance of Martin's intelligence represent exactly the kind of strategic deception that Operation Mincemeat was designed to achieve, drawing German forces away from the actual invasion target and improving Allied chances of success. We've achieved strategic surprise on a scale that seemed impossible just months ago, reports General Eisenhower during a briefing on invasion preparations. The Germans are defending everywhere except where we're actually going to attack. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Operation Mincemeat's success is the extent to which German intelligence continues to believe in Martin's authenticity, even as they analyze his documents for months. The Germans have created an entire file on Major Martin, reports the intelligence analyst tracking German reactions. They've researched his background, analyzed his handwriting, and even attempted to verify his relationship with Pam. They're treating him as one of their most important intelligence sources. The German investment in validating Martin's identity creates a psychological commitment to believing his information that makes it difficult for them to question the strategic intelligence he provided, even when other sources begin to contradict it. Once they've decided he's genuine, they interpret everything else in light of that assumption, explains Dr. Masterman. Contradictory intelligence is dismissed as deception, while confirming intelligence is seen as validation. It's a classic example of confirmation bias in intelligence analysis. The psychological trap that Operation Mincemeat creates for German intelligence demonstrates the power of well-crafted deception to exploit natural human cognitive biases and analytical blind spots. "We've made them complicit in their own deception," Montague observes. The more effort they put into validating Martin's identity, the more committed they become to believing his information. The success of Operation Mincemeat extends beyond its immediate strategic impact to influence German intelligence practices and decision-making processes throughout the remainder of the war. The Germans have become much more cautious about accepting captured documents, reports the post-operation analysis, but they've also become more suspicious of their own intelligence sources, which is making it harder for them to distinguish between genuine and false information. The long-term impact of the operation on German intelligence capabilities represents an additional strategic benefit that goes beyond the immediate tactical advantages gained for the Sicily invasion. "We've not only deceived them about our invasion plans," concludes Colonel Bevan, "we've undermined their confidence in their ability to detect deception, which will make all future deception operations more likely to succeed." The invasion of Sicily begins on July 9, 1943, and achieves complete tactical surprise against German forces that have been weakened by the redeployments triggered by Operation Mincemeat. "Resistance has been lighter than our most optimistic projections," reports General Montgomery during the first day of the invasion. "The Germans appear to have been caught completely off guard, with minimal forces in position to defend the beaches." The military success of Operation Husky validates the strategic deception achieved by Operation Mincemeat and demonstrates the effectiveness of using fictional characters to convey false intelligence. "Major Martin has saved thousands of Allied lives," Montague tells his team as they review the invasion reports. "A man who never existed has achieved more than most real soldiers ever do. But the ultimate measure of Operation Mincemeat's success may be its demonstration that the most effective military operations are often those that are fought with imagination rather than firepower, with creativity rather than conventional weapons." July 25, 1943. Sicily has fallen to Allied forces in just 38 days, far faster than even the most optimistic pre-invasion estimates. The German and Italian defenders, weakened by the troop redeployments triggered by Operation Mincemeat, have been unable to mount effective resistance against the Allied assault. "The invasion succeeded beyond our wildest expectations," reports General Alexander, the Allied ground forces commander, during a post-operation briefing. "German resistance collapsed so quickly that we've been able to advance our timeline for the next phase of operations by several weeks." The strategic success of the Sicily invasion validates Operation Mincemeat and establishes it as the most successful deception operation of World War II. But the full impact of Major Martin's fictional existence extends far beyond the immediate military victory. "We've fundamentally changed German intelligence practices," observes Colonel Bevan during his analysis of the operation's long-term effects. "They're now so paranoid about deception operations that they're questioning genuine intelligence sources and missing real strategic information." The psychological impact of Operation Mincemeat on German intelligence capabilities proves as important as its immediate tactical benefits, creating a climate of suspicion and uncertainty that hampers German strategic planning throughout the remainder of the war. Intercepted German communications show increasing skepticism about all captured documents and human intelligence sources, reports the Government Code and Cipher School. They're so afraid of being deceived again that they're paralyzed by indecision about what intelligence to trust. The paranoia that Operation Mincemeat instills in German intelligence creates opportunities for additional deception operations that exploit their heightened suspicion of obvious intelligence sources by providing false information through channels that appear to be secure. "We're now able to deceive them by telling them the truth through channels they think we're trying to use for deception," explains Dr. Masterman during a briefing on follow-up operations. "They're so convinced that we're trying to fool them, that they refuse to believe obvious intelligence. The strategic confusion that results from German over-analysis of intelligence sources contributes to a series of strategic miscalculations that benefit Allied operations throughout 1943 and 1944. The Germans missed the timing of the Normandy invasion, partly because they were so focused on detecting deception operations that they ignored genuine intelligence about our actual plans, reports the post-war intelligence analysis. Operation Mincemeat created a legacy of paranoia that continued to benefit us long after Martin's mission was complete. But perhaps the most important legacy of Operation Mincemeat is its demonstration of the power of narrative and character development in strategic deception operations. What Montagu and Cholmondeley proved, concludes the official history of wartime deception operations, is that the most effective lies are those built on universal human truths. By creating a character who felt real because he embodied authentic human experiences, they achieved a level of credibility that no amount of technical sophistication could match. The techniques developed for creating Major Martin's fictional identity influence intelligence operations for decades after the war, establishing principles of character development and narrative construction that become standard practice in deception operations. Every major deception operation since 1943 has used elements of the Mincemeat model, explains the CIA's chief of deception operations during a 1960s training session. The principle that fictional characters must be psychologically authentic to be operationally effective has become fundamental doctrine. The international recognition of Operation Mincemeat's success leads to its adoption as a case study in military academies and intelligence schools around the world, where it's taught as an example of how creativity and attention to detail can overcome superior enemy resources. Mincemeat demonstrates that intelligence warfare is fundamentally about understanding human psychology rather than just gathering information, explains the instructor at the Royal Military Academy, who teaches the operation as part of the Strategic Studies curriculum. The most sophisticated technical intelligence is useless if you don't understand how people think and what they're likely to believe. The academic study of Operation Mincemeat also reveals the extent to which its success depended on the specific cultural and historical context of World War II, raising questions about whether similar operations could be effective in different circumstances. The operation succeeded partly because German intelligence officers shared certain cultural assumptions with their British counterparts, observes Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a historian who has studied wartime deception operations. They understood the social context of Martin's personal life because they came from similar backgrounds and had similar experiences. The cultural specificity of effective deception operations becomes an important consideration in post-war intelligence planning, as the Cold War creates conflicts between societies with very different cultural assumptions and social structures. Deceiving the Soviets requires completely different approaches than deceiving the Germans, explains the intelligence analyst responsible for Cold War deception planning. Cultural differences in personal relationships, social structures, and bureaucratic procedures mean that techniques that worked against Nazi Germany might be completely ineffective against communist intelligence services. The personal impact of Operation Mincemeat on its creators proves as significant as its strategic effects, as Montagu and Cholmondeley struggle with the psychological consequences of creating a fictional person who became more real to them than many actual people. "I sometimes dream about Martin," Montagu confides to his wife years after the war. "I know he never existed, but I created him so thoroughly that he feels like someone I actually knew. It's disturbing to realize how completely we convinced ourselves of our own deception." The psychological complexity of creating fictional characters for intelligence purposes becomes a subject of study for military psychologists who are concerned about the mental health effects on intelligence officers who specialize in deception operations. There's a real risk of losing touch with reality when your job requires you to create convincing fictional worlds, explains Dr. David Park, a military psychologist who has studied intelligence personnel. The officers who are best at deception operations are often those who are most susceptible to being deceived by their own creations. The recognition of the psychological risks associated with deception work leads to the development of specialized training and support programs for intelligence officers who work on long-term deception operations. We now provide regular psychological evaluation and counseling for officers involved in major deception operations, explains the head of personnel for the intelligence services. The Mincemeat experience taught us that creating fictional characters can be as psychologically demanding as any other form of undercover work. The ethical questions raised by Operation Mincemeat also influence post-war intelligence practices, as military leaders grapple with the moral implications of using human remains for deception purposes. The operation was successful and probably saved thousands of lives, one observes the military chaplain, who has been asked to comment on the ethical aspects of the operation. But using a human corpse as a prop in an intelligence operation raises serious questions about dignity and respect for the dead. The ethical debate over Operation Mincemeat leads to the development of guidelines for future deception operations that attempt to balance operational effectiveness with moral considerations. We've established protocols that require ethical review of any deception operation that involves human remains or the creation of fictional identities based on real people, explains the Intelligence Oversight Committee. The success of Mincemeat doesn't justify ignoring the moral implications of such operations. The public revelation of Operation Mincemeat in the 1950s creates a sensation that establishes it as one of the most famous intelligence operations in history, inspiring books, films, and academic studies that examine its techniques and implications. The public fascination with Mincemeat reflects a broader interest in the role of deception and creativity in warfare, observes the cultural historian who has studied public reactions to wartime intelligence operations. People are intrigued by the idea that imagination and storytelling can be more powerful than conventional weapons. The cultural impact of Operation Mincemeat extends beyond military history to influence popular understanding of intelligence work and the role of creativity in problem-solving. Mincemeat has become a metaphor for the power of creative thinking to overcome seemingly impossible challenges, explains the literature professor who has studied the operation's influence on post-war fiction. It's inspired countless stories about ordinary people using extraordinary imagination to achieve remarkable results. In 1977, Ewan Montague publishes The Man Who Never Was, a detailed account of Operation Mincemeat that becomes a bestseller and establishes the definitive record of the operation's planning and execution. I wrote the book partly to set the record straight about what actually happened, Montague explains in interviews about the publication, but also to honor the memory of Glinda Michael, whose death made the operation possible. He deserves to be remembered as someone who contributed to Allied victory, even if he never knew it. The book's success leads to a film adaptation that brings the story of Operation Mincemeat to a global audience and establishes it as one of the most celebrated intelligence operations in popular culture. The film captures the essential truth about the operation, Montague observes, which is that the most effective military operations are often those that rely on human understanding rather than technological superiority. When Montague dies in 1985, his obituaries focus not on his peacetime legal career, but on his wartime creation of Major William Martin and his contribution to Allied victory through the power of imagination and attention to detail. Ewan Montague proved that fiction can be more powerful than fact when it's crafted with sufficient skill and understanding, concludes the Times in its obituary. Major Martin may never have existed, but his impact on history was entirely real. The lesson of Operation Mincemeat isn't just about the effectiveness of deception operations or the importance of attention to detail in intelligence work. It's about the power of narrative and character to shape human perception and decision-making. The understanding that the most convincing lies are those built on universal human truths, and the recognition that creativity and imagination can be more powerful than any conventional weapon when properly applied. Montague and Cholmondeley succeeded because they understood that German intelligence officers were human beings who would respond to authentic human details in predictable ways. By creating a fictional character who embodied genuine human experiences and emotions, they achieved a level of credibility that no amount of technical sophistication could match. The operation also demonstrates the importance of understanding your enemy's psychology and analytical methods, showing how effective deception requires not just the ability to create false information, but the insight to present that information in ways that exploit the target's cognitive biases and analytical blind spots. Stories like this remind us that the most effective solutions to complex problems often come from creative thinking rather than conventional approaches, that understanding human psychology is more important than mastering technology, and that sometimes the most powerful weapons are those that exist only in the imagination. That's what we explore here, the moments when creativity becomes a form of warfare, when fictional characters change the course of real history, when the power of storytelling proves more effective than any conventional military strategy. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to understand the power of narrative and imagination in shaping human events, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because there are so many more stories like this one, waiting to be told with the depth and complexity they deserve. You won't want to miss what we discover next.